Captain Sarah adjusted her flight suit one last time before stepping into the briefing room. At 28, she had already logged over 2,000 flight hours, but today felt different. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Intelligence reports had been flooding in all morning about increased enemy activity near the contested airspace along the eastern border. The other pilots barely glanced up as she entered. Most of them still saw her as the quiet logistics officer who had recently transferred to their squadron. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 5 years flying top-secret reconnaissance missions in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. Her transfer to this base was part of a classified operation, and her real identity remained buried in files that only 3 people in the entire military had clearance to access. Colonel Martinez stood at the front of the room, his weathered face showing the strain of recent developments. Behind him, a large screen displayed satellite imagery of the border region where enemy forces had been massing. Red circles marked suspected anti-aircraft positions, while blue arrows showed friendly patrol routes. "Listen up, people," Martinez began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "We've got a situation developing. Our intelligence suggests a major push is coming within the next 48 hours. Enemy air assets have been repositioning throughout the night." Sarah studied the tactical display with the trained eye of someone who had been analyzing such patterns for years. She could see what the others missed. The enemy wasn't just repositioning for defense. The formation suggested an offensive operation designed to gain air superiority over a specific corridor. Her pulse quickened as she realized the implications. "We'll be running increased patrols," Martinez continued. 2-ship formations, standard CAP missions. I know some of you are new to this type of operation, so stick close to your wingmen and follow protocols. Lieutenant, a cocky pilot with barely 6 months of combat experience, raised his hand. "Sir, what about the new transfer? Shouldn't she be flying desk duty until she gets more familiar with our procedures?" Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She had dealt with this type of skepticism her entire career. The assumption that because she was quiet and didn't boast about her experience, she must be inexperienced. She simply nodded politely, giving no indication that she had more combat hours than in half the other pilots combined. "We'll be flying with Captain today," Martinez replied. "Standard reconnaissance sweep along Sector 7. Captain, a steady pilot in his mid-30s, nodded in Sarah's direction. "We'll take it easy out there, just observe and learn." Sarah suppressed a small smile. If only he knew that she had probably flown more reconnaissance missions than anyone else in the room. But maintaining her cover was crucial to the larger operation. Her real mission wasn't just about flying patrols. She was gathering intelligence on enemy capabilities while appearing to be nothing more than a transferred support officer learning the ropes. After the briefing, Sarah made her way to the flight line where her F-16 waited. The crew chief, Sergeant Williams, was performing his pre-flight inspection with the thoroughness of someone who took personal responsibility for every aircraft under his care. "First time in one of our birds, ma'am?" Williams asked as Sarah approached. "Looking forward to it," she replied, beginning her own inspection of the aircraft. Her movements were fluid and practiced, checking systems and components with the muscle memory that came from years of experience. Williams watched with growing interest as she examined details that most pilots would overlook. "You seem to know your way around an F-16, ma'am," he observed. "I've had some training," Sarah said modestly, not mentioning that she had logged over 800 hours in F-16s during her previous assignments. Arrived a few minutes later, already suited up and ready to go. "Ready for your orientation flight?" "Absolutely, sir." As they strapped into their aircraft, Sarah felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before every mission. The F-16's cockpit felt like home, every switch, every display, every control exactly where her hands expected to find them. She ran through her pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency while maintaining radio silence. "Viper 1 ready for taxi's voice crackled through the radio. "Viper 2 ready," Sarah responded, her voice calm and professional. The tower cleared them for takeoff, and soon they were climbing into the clear morning sky. Sarah stayed in perfect formation maintaining the precise spacing and positioning that marked an experienced pilot, but she was careful not to make it look too easy. "Nice flying," commented as they leveled off at their assigned altitude. "You're a natural." "Thank you, sir, just trying to keep up." Their patrol route took them along a series of waypoints that would eventually bring them close to the contested border region. Sarah used the opportunity to familiarize herself with the local terrain while keeping one eye on her radar display. So far, the skis were empty of any hostile contacts. It was during their second hour aloft that everything changed. Sarah's radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with multiple contacts appearing on the edge of their scope. She quickly analyzed the signature patterns, 5 fast-moving aircraft approaching from the northeast at high speed. Viper 1, I'm picking up multiple bogies, bearing 045, range 60 miles and closing, she reported, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline surge she felt. Checked his own radar display. Confirmed, Viper 2. That's a lot of company. Control, this is Viper flight with multiple unknown contacts approaching from the northeast. The response from air traffic control was immediate and tense. Viper flight, be advised we have no friendly aircraft in your area. You are cleared to investigate and identify. Sarah felt her training kick in as they turned toward the approaching contacts. Years of classified missions had taught her to read tactical situations quickly and accurately. The approaching aircraft were flying in a formation that suggested hostile intent, spread out to maximize their engagement envelope while maintaining mutual support. Viper 1, recommend we maintain altitude and prepare for defensive maneuvers, Sarah suggested, her tactical mind already working through various scenarios. Glanced at his wingman with new respect. His radio discipline and tactical awareness were impressive for someone supposedly new to combat operations. Good thinking, Viper 2. Stay close and follow my lead. As the distance closed, both pilots could see the approaching aircraft on their visual displays. The sleek profiles and aggressive posture left little doubt about their intentions. These weren't lost training aircraft or confused civilian pilots. These were enemy fighters, and they were heading straight for Sarah's position. Control, Viper flight has visual confirmation of 5 enemy aircraft. Appears to be 27 variants, closing fast and showing hostile intent, reported. Viper flight, you are cleared to engage if fired upon. Backup is en route but will not arrive for 15 minutes. Sarah felt time slow down as it always did before combat. Her senses sharpened, her breathing steadied, and her mind began calculating angles, distances, and timing with the precision of a computer. This was the moment she had been training for her entire career, even though nobody around her had any idea of her true capabilities. The enemy formation was now clearly visible, spread out in a classic attack formation designed to overwhelm their 2-ship flight. Sarah could see that was a competent pilot, but he was about to face odds that would challenge even the most experienced aviator. What he didn't know was that his supposedly inexperienced wingman was about to reveal skills that would change everything. Viper 2, stay in defensive formation, ordered as the enemy aircraft continued their approach. Don't try to be a hero out here. Sarah keyed her radio to respond, but before she could speak, her radar warning receiver screamed out an alert that made her blood run cold. The enemy aircraft had just locked onto them with their fire control radars, and missile launch was imminent. The fight was about to begin, and Sarah's secret was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. The shriek of the radar warning receiver filled Sarah's cockpit as multiple missile locks appeared on her display. In that instant, years of classified training and combat experience took over. Her hands moved across the controls with lightning speed, executing defensive maneuvers that she had practiced thousands of times in the most advanced simulators and real combat situations. Missiles in the air, his voice cracked over the radio as the first enemy fighter launched. Break right, break right. But Sarah was already moving, her F-16 rolling into a sharp defensive turn that pulled nearly 8 Gs. Her anti-G suit inflated to keep blood flowing to her brain as she yanked the aircraft through a series of maneuvers that would have impressed even the most seasoned instructors at Top Gun. Followed her lead, but couldn't help noticing that his supposedly inexperienced wingman was flying like someone with years of combat experience. The first missile streaked past aircraft, missing by less than 50 feet as he pulled through a desperate barrel roll. Sarah's aircraft danced through the sky like it was an extension of her own body, evading 2 missiles that had been fired simultaneously in her direction. Her electronic countermeasures dispensed chaff and flares in perfectly timed sequences, while she maintained enough situational awareness to keep track of all 5 enemy aircraft. Viper 2, where did you learn to fly like that? gasped as he struggled to keep up with Sarah's movements. There was no time to answer. The enemy fighters had split into two groups, 3 aircraft pursuing while 2 came after Sarah. It was a classic divide-and-conquer tactic, designed to prevent the 2 American pilots from providing mutual support. But Sarah recognized the maneuver from her classified briefings, and she knew exactly how to counter it. Instead of running from the 2 fighters pursuing her, Sarah suddenly reversed direction in a move that conventional tactics. Her F-16 snap-rolled inverted and pulled through a vertical climb that brought her directly into the flight path of the 3 aircraft chasing. The maneuver was so unexpected and executed with such precision that it caught the enemy pilots completely off guard. "Fox 2, Sarah called out as she launched her first Sidewinder missile at the closest enemy aircraft. The heat-seeking weapon tracked perfectly to its target, striking the 27 in the engine exhaust. The enemy fighter exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the afternoon sky. Watched in amazement as his wingman, who was supposed to be learning basic combat procedures, had just executed one of the most difficult tactical maneuvers in air combat and scored a kill with textbook precision. But there was no time to process what he was seeing. 4 enemy aircraft were still in the fight, and they were now extremely angry. "Good kill, Viper 2, managed to say as he tried to bring his own weapons to bear. "But how did you?" "Later," Sarah cut him off as her radar warning receiver lit up again. The remaining enemy fighters had regrouped and were coming at them from multiple directions. "We've got company." The next few minutes unfolded like a deadly dance choreographed by the laws of physics and the skills of highly trained fighter pilots. Sarah moved her aircraft through the 3-dimensional with an intuitive understanding of aerial combat that took most pilots years to develop. She seemed to anticipate every enemy move before it happened, positioning herself for optimal shots while avoiding the increasingly desperate attacks from the opposing fighters. The second enemy aircraft fell to guns after Sarah maneuvered it perfectly into his firing solution. Her tactical awareness allowed her to set up opportunities for both pilots while maintaining the initiative in the engagement. Was beginning to realize that he wasn't flying with a novice. He was witnessing the work of someone who understood air combat at a level that few pilots ever achieved. "Splash 2, called out as his target spiraled toward the ground, trailing smoke and flame. But the remaining 3 enemy pilots were not giving up easily. They regrouped for a coordinated attack that would have overwhelmed most 2-ship flights. The lead aircraft came straight in while his wingmen approached from different angles, creating a complex firing solution that required split-second timing to survive. Sarah's mind processed the tactical situation with the speed and accuracy that came from years of facing life-or-death decisions in hostile airspace. She had flown against some of the best enemy pilots in the world during her classified missions, and these 3 were skilled but not extraordinary. However, they were flying excellent aircraft and had the advantage of numbers. The key to survival was to prevent them from coordinating their attack effectively. Sarah rolled her F-16 into an aggressive left turn that brought her nose around toward the lead enemy fighter. At the same time, she called out precise directions to that positioned him for a defensive shot against one of the flanking aircraft. "Viper 1, come left 30 degrees and climb. You'll have a shot on the trailing fighter in 5 seconds, she directed with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Followed her instructions without question. Something in Sarah's voice and the precision of her tactical directions convinced him that she knew exactly what she was doing. When the shot presented itself exactly as she had predicted, he took it without hesitation. "Fox 2, called as his Sidewinder streaked toward its target. The missile struck the enemy fighter in the wing root, sending it spinning out of control toward the ground below. That left 2 enemy aircraft, but they were now facing a pilot whose true abilities were finally being revealed. Sarah had been holding back during the early part of the engagement, trying to maintain her cover as an inexperienced transfer pilot. But with life on the line and the tactical situation becoming increasingly desperate, she could no longer afford to hide her skills. The 4th enemy fighter fell to her guns after a pursuit that showcased every advanced maneuvering technique in the fighter pilot's handbook. Sarah stayed glued to his 6 o'clock position through a series of increasingly desperate evasive maneuvers, firing short, controlled bursts that methodically destroyed his aircraft's control surfaces before the final burst found his engine. "Splash 4, she called out as the enemy fighter broke apart in midair. The last enemy pilot, realizing that he was now alone against two American fighters who had just destroyed four of his squadron mates, made a desperate attempt to escape. But Sarah was not about to let him report back on their position and capabilities. She rolled into pursuit with following close behind. The chase lasted only 90 seconds. Sarah's superior knowledge of the F-16's performance envelope allowed her to cut off the enemy pilot's escape route and force him into a series of turns that bled away his energy advantage. When he finally ran out of options and tried to turn and fight, Sarah was ready with a perfectly positioned shot that ended the engagement. "Splash 5, Sarah announced as the last enemy fighter fell toward the earth below. The sudden silence that followed was almost deafening. In the span of 12 minutes, Sarah had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. But as the adrenaline began to fade, found himself staring at his wingman with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Control, this is Viper Flight," Sarah reported with professional calm. "Area is clear of hostile aircraft. 5 enemy fighters destroyed. Request permission to return to base." "Viper Flight, outstanding work. You are cleared to return to base immediately. Expect a full debrief upon arrival." As they formed up for the flight home, couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "I need to ask you something. Where exactly did you learn to fly like that? Because what I just saw wasn't the work of someone new to combat operations." Sarah keyed her radio for a long moment before responding. The engagement had blown her cover completely. There was no way to explain what had witnessed without revealing at least part of the truth. "Captain," she said carefully, "I think there are some things about my background that weren't included in my official transfer paperwork." Studied the aircraft flying in perfect formation beside him. The pilot who had just saved both their lives and destroyed 5 enemy fighters in 12 minutes was clearly not who she appeared to be. "I'm beginning to figure that out. I'm also beginning to think that might not even be your real name." Sarah smiled grimly inside her helmet. Her secret was out, but they were both alive. As they headed back to base, she knew that everything was about to change. The quiet logistics officer who had transferred to their squadron a few weeks ago was about to become the subject of very intense interest from a lot of very important people. The flight line buzzed with activity as Sarah and taxied back to their parking spots. Ground crews had already heard preliminary reports over the radio, and word was spreading quickly that something extraordinary had happened during what was supposed to be a routine patrol mission. As Sarah shut down her engines, she could see Colonel Martinez waiting beside her aircraft with an expression that mixed concern, curiosity, and something that looked suspiciously like recognition. Captain climbed down from his F-16 first, his flight suit soaked with sweat and his face showing the strain of the most intense combat he had ever experienced. He walked directly to Sarah's aircraft as she completed her post-flight procedures, waiting for her to emerge from the cockpit. He said as she removed her helmet, "Or whoever you really are, we need to talk." Sarah nodded, knowing that the conversation she had been dreading for months was now inevitable. "I understand, Captain, but I think Colonel Martinez might want to be part of that discussion." Colonel Martinez approached them with measured steps, studying Sarah's face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Captain, or should I say Major Sarah Mitchell, Phantom, assigned to the 847th Special Operations Squadron until your transfer to this unit 6 weeks ago." His eyes widened as the pieces suddenly fell into place. The 847th was a unit that most pilots had heard whispered about but never officially acknowledged. They flew the most dangerous missions in the most contested airspace, often operating under such deep cover that their own families didn't know what they did for a living. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Martinez smiled grimly. "Major Mitchell, your cover was blown the moment you executed that vertical reversal at 8 Gs while maintaining perfect situational awareness of 5 enemy aircraft. That's not something they teach in basic pilot training. That's something you learn after a couple hundred hours of combat time against the best pilots in the world." The small crowd of ground crew and pilots that had gathered around the aircraft fell silent as they absorbed what the colonel was saying. The quiet transfer pilot who had been flying administrative missions for the past month wasn't just experienced. She was apparently one of the military's most elite pilots. "Besides," Martinez continued, "I've been in contact with General Richardson at Strategic Air Command for the past hour. He was very interested to learn that one of his deep cover assets had just engaged 5 enemy fighters. Apparently, your real mission here was to gather intelligence on enemy capabilities while maintaining a low profile. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the truth finally came out. Colonel, I apologize for the deception, but my orders were very specific about maintaining operational security. Orders that you just violated by demonstrating capabilities that no logistics officer should possess, Martinez observed. But given the circumstances, I think we can make an exception. Lieutenant, who had questioned Sarah's qualifications just that morning, stood nearby with his mouth hanging open. You mean she's been flying combat missions while we thought she was pushing papers? For the past 5 years, Martinez confirmed. Major Mitchell has more combat flight hours than most of our pilots combined. She's also been personally credited with 12 confirmed air-to-air kills prior to today's engagement. Shook his head in amazement. 12 kills, and today she added 5 more in 12 minutes. 17 total, Sarah said quietly, but who's counting? Sergeant Williams, who had been listening to the conversation while pretending to service the aircraft, stepped forward with a grin. I knew something was different about the way you checked that aircraft this morning, ma'am. Most pilots miss half the details you caught. Sarah smiled at the crew chief. Good maintenance keeps pilots alive, Sergeant Williams. I've learned to pay attention to the details. As the group talked, a black sedan pulled up to the flight line and 2 men in civilian clothes emerged. Sarah recognized them immediately as representatives from the intelligence community, probably sent to assess the security implications of her blown cover. Major Mitchell, the senior agent said as he approached. I'm Agent Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to discuss the events of this afternoon. Colonel Martinez stepped between the agent and Sarah. Agent, Major Mitchell is under my command while she's stationed at this base. Any discussions can take place through proper channels. Nodded politely but firmly. Colonel, with respect, Major Mitchell's true mission here was coordinated at levels well above both our pay grades. The fact that her cover is now compromised has implications that extend far beyond this base. Sarah stepped forward, sensing the tension building between the military and intelligence communities. If I may suggest, perhaps we could continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting. The flight line probably isn't the best place for a conversation about classified operations. Agent agreed, and within minutes Sarah found herself in a secure conference room with Colonel Martinez, agent, and who had been included because he was now a witness to classified information. Major Mitchell began, your performance today was extraordinary, but it has created some significant problems. Your cover identity was carefully constructed over months of preparation. Now every pilot on this base knows that you're not who you appeared to be. The intelligence value of the mission may be compromised, Sarah acknowledged, but 5 enemy fighters won't be reporting back on our capabilities or force strength in this sector. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying the people around the table. It seems to me that we have 2 choices. We can extract Major Mitchell and end whatever intelligence operation she was conducting, or we can adapt the mission to account for the new circumstances. What do you mean? Asked. I mean that we now have one of the military's most experienced combat pilots stationed at a base that's likely to see increased enemy activity, Martinez explained. Maybe it's time to stop hiding her capabilities and start using them. Sarah felt a surge of relief at the colonel's words. The constant deception had been wearing on her, and the thought of returning to normal flight operations was appealing. Sir, if the mission parameters have changed, I'd like to request assignment to regular combat operations. Considered this for a moment. The intelligence operation you were conducting was valuable, but recent developments have accelerated the timeline for several other initiatives. It's possible that your cover being blown might actually work in our favor. Who had been listening quietly to the discussion, finally spoke up. If I may ask, what exactly was Major Mitchell's real mission here? Glanced at Sarah before answering. She was gathering intelligence on enemy fighter capabilities and tactics by observing their patrol patterns and engagement protocols. The data she collected has been invaluable in updating our tactical doctrine. And now, asked. Now we know that our tactical doctrine works, Sarah said with a slight smile. 5 enemy fighters found that out the hard way. Colonel Martinez stood up, indicating that the meeting was coming to an end. Major Mitchell, effective immediately, you're assigned to regular flight operations with this squadron. Agent, you can tell your superiors that the intelligence mission was a complete success, even if it ended differently than planned. As they left the conference room, walked alongside Sarah. I have to ask, during the engagement today, were you holding back at all? Sarah considered the question carefully. Captain, today you saw maybe 70% of what I'm capable of in an F-16. I was trying to maintain some semblance of my cover story while keeping us both alive. Stopped walking and stared at her. 70%? You destroyed 5 enemy fighters in 12 minutes at 70%. Combat isn't about showing off, Sarah explained. It's about accomplishing the mission with minimum risk to friendly forces. Today's mission was to survive the engagement and return safely. We did that. But you made it look easy. Sarah shook her head. It wasn't easy. Those were skilled pilots flying excellent aircraft. But I've been training for situations like that my entire career. When you fly missions behind enemy lines for 5 years, you learn to make quick decisions and execute them flawlessly. As they walked back toward the flight line, other pilots began approaching them with questions and congratulations. Word had spread throughout the base about the engagement, and Sarah found herself the center of attention in a way she had spent months trying to avoid. Lieutenant approached somewhat sheepishly. Major Mitchell, I owe you an apology for my comments in the briefing this morning. No apology necessary, Lieutenant, Sarah replied. You were working with the information you had. That's what good pilots do. Would you be willing to share some of your experience with the squadron? Asked. I think we could all learn from someone with your background. Sarah looked around at the eager faces of her fellow pilots. These were good people who were dedicated to defending their country, just as she was. The difference was that they had never been given the opportunities to develop their skills in the intense crucible of deep cover operations. I'd be happy to share what I've learned, she said. But remember that experience comes from making mistakes and learning from them. The goal isn't to impress people with fancy flying. The goal is to complete the mission and bring everyone home safely. Colonel Martinez appeared at Sarah's shoulder. Major Mitchell, there's a secure phone call for you from General Richardson. He'd like to discuss your new assignment. As Sarah headed toward the communications center, she reflected on how much her life had changed in a single afternoon. This morning, she had been an unknown logistics officer trying to blend in with a new squadron. Tonight, she would sleep as a decorated combat pilot whose true identity was known to everyone on the base. The phone call with General Richardson was brief but significant. Her deep cover mission was officially terminated, but her new assignment would allow her to use her skills openly while training other pilots in advanced combat tactics. It was exactly what she had been hoping for during the long months of maintaining her false identity. When she returned to the squadron ready room, Sarah found the other pilots studying gun camera footage from the afternoon's engagement. The video clearly showed her executing maneuvers and achieving hits that demonstrated years of advanced training and combat experience. Major Mitchell, called out Captain Davis, another squadron pilot, could you walk us through this sequence where you reverse direction and set up shot? I've never seen anything like it. Sarah settled into a chair and began explaining the tactical theory behind the maneuver. For the first time in months, she was able to speak freely about her experience and knowledge without worrying about maintaining a cover story. It felt good to finally be herself again. As the evening wore on and the discussion continued, Sarah realized that her greatest victory today hadn't been shooting down 5 enemy fighters. It had been the moment when she could finally stop pretending to be someone she wasn't. The quiet logistics officer was gone forever, replaced by Major Sarah Mitchell, one of the military's most experienced combat pilots, ready to share her knowledge with the next generation of fighter pilots who would defend their country's skies. The enemy had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating American pilots. But more importantly, Sarah had learned that sometimes the best way to serve your country is to be exactly who you are without apology or pretense. Her secret was out, but her real mission was just beginning.